Mayday, air. 72, we have smoke in the cabin.
Channel 72, contact, final maintain.
Hey, good evening and welcome to Galactic Terrors for July 2023, the online reading series that scours the known universe for scary stories, strange tales, weird horror, and all sorts of literary oddities from the most imaginative authors writing in a variety of fascinating genres. Galactic Terrors streams the second Thursday of the month, every month, more or less, and I am James Chambers here with co-host Carol GYZANDER.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's a very hot day where I am in the New York City area, and I know other places out west it's a lot hotter. So,
is that why you put up the desert background?
Yes, yes. Of course, it's also the bed. That's where my story in Weird Tales takes place. So that just I'm kind of fond of that one right now.
Yeah, that helps. And tonight we're bringing you three fantastic readers who have joined us to share their stories. We have MARC Abbott, Amy GRECH, and Douglas GWILYM, and they're going to be reading and talking about projects and all sorts of cool things. So I hope you'll throw some questions their way. They seem ready to answer.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So
it's fun, talking about projects, Jim. There's an awful lot of things going on, aren't there? We are aware of a couple of fun Kickstarters for writing projects and things that are happening, and one of them, I'm kind of excited. We have a brand new member in the Horror Writers New York chapter. Jennifer Jean McArdle has a Kickstarter going for an anthology called Escalators to Hell, Shopping Mall Horrors. I mean, how can you beat that? That's a really cool idea. Apparently all the stories in the anthology are going to take something to do in a shopping mall or whatever. So that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's an interesting theme for an anthology. I'll be curious to see how that goes. I mean, I suppose it could go up or down,
like the escalator. Yeah. I'm sure there's going to be at least one problem with holiday shopping with everybody there. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. But there do seem to be a lot of really cool, interesting projects and Kickstarters going on in horror right now. That's definitely one of them. And I put the link for the Kickstarter up in the chat if anyone wants to give that a look and check it out. And I think that they will also at some point be open to submissions.
Yes, I think that's coming up next month after they fund. So that's I always like to say things positive that way. After they fund, yes.
Right. So if you're interested in reading elevator shopping mall stories or writing one, there might be something there for you.
Yeah.
But I know we have another Kickstarter project we were talking about that's coming up, or it's closing soon, right? I think it's closing.
Yeah, it's closing tomorrow. It's for a really fun and exciting thing. It's season 2 of Afflicted, and this is something that I actually backed for the first season, so I've been listening to it and keeping an eye on it, enjoying it thoroughly. It's a full cast horror thriller audio drama. And it's written by another HWA member, Tanya Ransom. And every single one of their episodes, they do the full bells and whistles. They've got different actors doing their characters. They've got music. They've got sound. They've got terrific production values and a really exciting storyline as they go through. The first season was about a book that was bound in human flesh that was sort of controlling the actions in this particular town. And they used the values of hoodoo to sort of help defeat this. And that was kind of exciting to me. And I got to learn a lot about it and really enjoyed it. The acting was fabulous. So
very cool. Yeah, I have come to really enjoy audio horror lately, especially on some of my recent long drives. I throw on an audiobook or some kind of podcast or an old radio show. And this stuff is just tremendous fun, and it really gives people a different way to tell a horror story. But I think we have a pretty neat little trailer video for Afflicted. Should we go ahead and share that?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Whether it was witchery, some modern science, or a demon let loose from hell, I am unable to decide. William's Bell, from an authenticated history of the Bell Witch.
Who's there?
From 1817 to 1821, an entity calling itself Kate tormented the Bell family of West Tennessee. There is still no widely accepted explanation for this haunting. Coming summer 2024, on the new hit audio drama Afflicted, the Bell Witch returns to haunt a family in 1960s Tennessee. But only if we raise enough money to pay our cast and crew a living wage. Help bring this haunting to life and snag exclusive rewards like limited edition supporter t-shirts, producer credits, and more at afflictedaudio.com/support. But do it quickly. Some perks are limited only to early supporters.
Wow, that's a cool trailer, and I love the commitment as I guess that was Tanya's voice. Perhaps.
It was Tanya.
Saying, they want to make sure they can pay all their creators a living wage. Seems very timely considering what's going on in the news with the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild and Hollywood and all of that. So that's admirable. So if you think you might want to throw some support towards Afflicted, here is the link to check it out.
Yeah. It's really important.
Go ahead, Carol.
I was going to say we really have to support the creative folks, because without somebody writing it and putting it together, there's nothing to see.
Yeah, and I think we're hoping to have Tanya come on for future Galactic Terrors and maybe do a reading and talk about some of her work in audio.
Yeah, that would be very exciting, because I listen to most of my books on audio, so I am a huge audio consumer. There's one other cool thing to mention about this. In the end of their season, they hit number 3 in U.S. audio dramas during the finale. I mean, that's pretty freaking awesome.
That's impressive.
They had about 600,000 total listens since it premiered in Halloween, just in 2022. So, wow, it's really gone over great. Yeah.
And that's what is the first one also called Afflicted, or did you say that?
Yeah, it's called Afflicted, and that was a complete story in and of itself. But one of the characters, who happens to be the book bound in human flesh, will be continuing on to haunt some other location. So
okay, so the continuing character is the book.
At least the book, yes, and I can't wait to find out if someone else is or not. Yeah.
All right. So I've just put, if you want to go and check that out too, I just put the links in for the Afflicted audio site.
Yeah, you could binge through the whole thing and really have a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah. All right, I know what I'll be listening to next time I have to hit the road.
Hit the road, Jim. I promise not to sing anymore.
So I think maybe we should start moving into our readings. What do you think, Carol?
Yeah, well, we're talking about how much fun audio is and hearing some stories. Let's hear some stories. Who's going to do the first introduction, Jim?
Quick messages from the management before we go ahead with the first introduction. One, please click subscribe, like and subscribe to follow future Galactic Terrors transmissions. If you are joining us for the first time this evening, welcome, and we hope that you'll go ahead and sign on to our YouTube channel to get updates when we are streaming future broadcasts. Please like this. These are all things that turn the internet pinwheel and help the world keep spinning. So like and subscribe. You can also sign up for our Galactic Terrors newsletter. And this is not a spammy newsletter, so please don't worry about that. This goes out generally about twice a month, just once to alert everyone to the upcoming broadcast, and then a very close to or day of reminder that the broadcast is coming. So please feel free to go ahead and sign up for either of those. I'll get that link to the newsletter into the chat in just a minute. All right. And I think we're going to go ahead and jump into the main attractions.
Yeah. So, Jim, who's going to do our first introduction here?
I think I will.
All right.
And then
That
you
sounds
will
good.
do the second one. All right.
That works
So
for me.
first up is MARC L ABBOTT. MARC is an HWA NY member and a familiar face on Galactic Terrors. So welcome, MARC. He is a Brooklyn native whose work includes The Hooky Party and Etienne and the Stardust Express. He's the co-author of Hell at Brooklyn Tea and Hell at the Way Station, the two-time African-American literary award-winning horror anthology. His horror short stories are featured in Hell's Heart, Hell's Mall, Under Twin Suns, Alternate Histories of the Yellow Sign, Even in the Grave, and the Bram-Stoker-nominated horror anthology Empire State of Fright. He is a Moth Story Slam and Grand Slam storyteller, winner, and an award-winning actor. Find out more about him at whoismarkabbott.com. All right. Mark, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Mark Abbott, and I will be reading from Hell at Brooklyn Tea. Sorry about that. This is the second novel in the Hell series that I have worked on as an anthology. I will be reading an excerpt from the story entitled Vamp Skeeto. I went to visit Paul at the hospital 2 weeks later to ask how he was doing. He told me the doctors said he had passed out from the most advanced case of anemia they had ever seen. It would be a while before he was 100%. And then I asked what he remembered about that day. I remember going to the park with Pepper, my dog. We walked the usual trails, and on the way back, I think I was bit or stung by something. I felt a sharp pain on my neck. Then I got woozy, and that was it. Paul, did you tell the doctors you were stung? I did. And they claimed they didn't find any markings on my neck. I'm not sure what caused this. And then I heard my Pepper is dead. Look, you get some rest. I'll check on you in a day or so, but let me know if there's anything we can do. You can take down my sister's number and let her know what happened to me. I called his sister, Marcia, and she arrived that evening to see him. The doctors actually released him the next day, but confined him to bed rest for the next few weeks. He was recommended that there was no undue pressure be put on him. Everyone agreed to the doctor's orders, even as we continued canvassing the park for clues as to what might have caused our neighbor to pass out. Our early morning and late night searches proved worthless. Until 3 days after Paul came home, Felix and I made a terrifying discovery. We stumbled across a small area in the park, still wet from an early summer's rain. It looked like a marshland teeming with all manner of insects, along with some other things we were not prepared to see. Carcasses of multiple dead animals floated in the stagnant water, attracting flies and maggots. All the bodies appeared to have been drained of blood. We were careful not to touch any of them. And as we circled the outer portion of this marsh, we came across a beagle with a badly broken leg. And at the sight of us, he whimpered and yelped, apparently calling for us to save him. Felix knelt alongside to comfort the animal. And when we finally quieted him down, that's when we heard the other sound. A sickly, slurping noise coming from behind a large rock. Leaving the injured animal, we moved toward the sound, and we turned the corner of the rock and nearly passed out from revulsion and horror. Paul was on his knees, gripping a dog in both hands, sinking his teeth into its jugulars. He seemed intent on drinking the animal's blood until it was dry. The dog's whining left us feeling empty. Scattered around him lay more carcasses that Paul must have drained. I started to move, but Felix stopped me as the dog died in Paul's hands. We watched to see what he was going to do when he was done. Paul tossed the canine's corpse aside, got up and staggered to it in a zombie-like state back into the woods, and we followed him quietly. He went only a few feet to the dry ground and fell to his knees, lowering his head. And I heard a sound, like an old metal fan with blades spinning at high speed, but I couldn't see what the source of this sound was. Then Felix's hand fell on my shoulder. I looked at him. He had gone pale and was shaking. He pointed behind Paul, and I followed his finger. A Jack Russell-sized mosquito hovering above Paul, then injected his proboscis into his neck. It drank heavily until Paul passed out, then retreated into the trees. It took me a moment to process what I had just seen, and quietly and cautiously, we went to retrieve Paul's body. And I kept looking up, worried that the insect might come back and attack, but it was nowhere in sight. "Get his feet," Felix whispered. "I got his head." We lifted Paul's body, and he'd already started growing pale. Small droplets of blood started dripping from the corners of his mouth. And we hurried out of the area and eventually carried him outside of the park. And once out, we called for an ambulance. Then tried to devise a story that would not arouse suspicion. We told the paramedics he had been suffering from a mild form of delirium since he had lost his pet, and we found him passed out in the park. They never questioned why his pants legs were wet or asked if we had moved him any great distance. I called Marcia and she rushed to the hospital. Paul was admitted to the intensive care unit, suffering again from anemia and fatigue. And we waited until Marcia had spoken to the doctors, and she told us that several more tests were to be run to see if he had developed any clots or any problems since the last time he was hospitalized. One of the tests discovered traces of a foreign blood in his system, but it would take some time to figure out what type. That would give Felix and myself an opportunity to try tracking down this giant insect. Later that afternoon, we grabbed gear that we used to go fishing, along with rubber boots and pullovers. We stuffed them into a duffel bag and returned to the park and to the area we had seen the mosquito. It was deathly quiet. No sound of crickets or frogs of any kind. Felix suggested we be extra careful. In that silence, the insect would surely hear us. And I recommended to be even more cautious that we come back in the morning when people were in the park and there were more background noise. We agreed to leave and return early the next day. That night, Paul had a relapse and fell into a coma. Marcia told us about the coma the next day, and since there was little we could do, we decided to go and visit the park first before going to the hospital. We grabbed our gear again and went looking for the insect. As before, we found dead animals scattered about, along with a few that were barely alive. I had to force myself not to look at them because I wanted to help, but we couldn't. We had to press on. And I kept looking up because the insect had disappeared into the trees the day before. In the area where Paul had passed out, we found traces of on jagged marks on tree trunks, shredded insect wings on the ground, and dried blood on the tree bark. We grabbed as many samples of evidence as we could. And I turned to leave when I heard it above me. The sound of its wings was almost deafening. And I looked up in time to see the proboscis swing down and barely miss me. With a scream, I took off running, and I could feel it behind me, the long dagger-like proboscis close to the back of my neck. And I knew if I stopped or I fell, I was going to be stabbed. I saw Felix turn around, scream, and start to run himself. Peering back, I saw the insect's swollen abdomen filled with blood, and I knew it was destined, that I was destined to be its next meal. But then it started to slowly back off. And I kept running, even though the ground acted as if it did not want to support me. I fell, I crawled, I got back up, but I never looked back. Felix and I ran all the way back to the entrance of the park. We stopped briefly to catch our breaths, then hurried back to my place. I considered whom to call in order to report what we had found, since now we had evidence to support our find. Yet something deep inside me said we should wait. No one else around us was on to this thing, as far as we were aware. No one knew something was very wrong happening here. And the moment we told someone, or if the media found out, hordes of people would run out searching for it. There was no telling what could happen if it were confronted by large groups of people. I decided to do some quick research before going to see Paul. Felix went ahead to the hospital, and he said he would meet me there. I went to my desktop and started to search to figure out how something like this could have grown so big. I didn't know a lot about mosquitoes, but what I knew is that they weren't supposed to get that large. It should have collapsed under its own weight with all the blood in its abdomen, let alone be able to fly. And I learned mosquitoes that fed on humans were more likely to transmit diseases like malaria from person to person. They tend to stick to one species entirely for feeding, and after such a blood feeding, they rested then laid eggs. I was fortunate to get the last piece of information from an article on malaria. Only the females drank blood. They lay anywhere between 30 to 300 eggs during their lifespan in and around water. It occurred to me the mosquito had chased Felix and me, wasn't trying to kill us. She was trying to keep us away from her eggs. Mind you, I didn't have proof of this, but after processing all this information I'd read, it made sense. There was still no information on mosquitoes growing the size of a small dog. At the hospital, they told me Paul had been moved to another wing for closer monitoring. He had not wakened from his coma, and I crossed the length of the hospital net to where he was. Both Marcia and Felix were with him. For safety reasons, I had to wait until one of them came out. An hour passed, and still neither of them emerged from the room, and I finally slipped past the nurse's station and through a set of double doors to discover for myself what was happening. The hall was fairly quiet, with the exception of some humming machines and an oxygen tank hissing in one of the rooms. I continued down the hall, passing several rooms and wondering if the patients within all of these were comatose. Paul's room was near the end of the hall, and the only one with the door ajar. I pushed the door open and looked in. The room was cold and dim. I noticed a damp smell when I first walked in. Then I saw Marcia slumped over in a chair, her eyes wide open, her skin pale, and her eyes sunken in. Small droplets of blood trickled down her chin. I turned quickly and spotted Felix in the corner. He too was pale, but unlike Marcia, his neck looked swollen, his tongue out of his mouth. I slowly moved closer to check his pulse. Then I saw the large puncture wound at the base of his neck. It resembled the large marking that's left behind when a tuberculosis skin test comes back positive. And I gasped in horror and backed out of the room, forgetting I had come to see Paul. And I headed back to the double doors, but caught something out of the corner of my eye, and I paused. Through the slightly open door, I saw a man in a white gown, leaning over another patient, stretched out on the bed, the patient's legs twitching rapidly, then abruptly stopped. The man in the white gown made a terrible slurping sound, then raised his head. I saw blood dripping onto the sheets below, and the patient in the bed with their head falling to the side. "What are you doing?" I screamed. The man turned. To my surprise, it was Paul. He stared at me a moment, then slowly moved sideways toward the corner of the room. I stepped into the room, but all but closed the door behind me. He looked around as if to find an escape route. I started to speak, but he ran into the corner, pressing his hands against the wall. He acted scared of me. I got within a few feet of him before he tried to scale the wall backwards. Paul, what is wrong with you? What are you doing in here? Paul stopped crawling, then charged me. I threw my hands up in time to keep him from running me over. He seized my arms, then turned his head toward my elbow and opened his mouth. Something sharp, like a needle, brushed against me. I jerked back. He did the same. I struggled to push him off me, but he tightened his grip, turning me toward the wall, and I slipped and I fell on my back. He hit the wall hard. His eyes shifted to my neck. His mouth opened again. He slowly stuck out his tongue, and on the tip of it, I saw an ugly brown laceration. And before I really processed what it was, a long needle-like thing pushed out of it. For more, get a copy of Hell at Brooklyn Tea.
Oh man, that is so wonderfully creepy.
Thank you.
I've been an outdoor person ever since I was 2. My parents took me backpacking and a scout leader, and oh yeah, nasty critters from the woods, Mark. Oh golly.
Thank you.
What was the inspiration for this? What were you thinking when you started?
Okay, this actually, I have to give full credit to my wife. This story came about because we were having a conversation one night about bad horror movies. We used to watch these horrible movies on the Sci-Fi Channel. And one night she says to me, she goes, I got an idea. Vamp-skeeto. I'm like, what? She goes, Vamp-skeeto. Think about it. Like vampire mosquitoes. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, they're already bloodsuckers. That's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? And she goes, but think about it. They bite people and turn people into, I was like, what, mosquitoes? And she was like, no, vampires. And I was like, all right. 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting up working on a completely different project. And I'm like, oh my God, I realized exactly how to validate this story. Okay. And so it just kind of came out. And I'm a big fan of the old 50s, the atomic right. Age. Them is one of my favorite science fiction movies of all time. So I kind of, when you read the story and find out what caused this, it's almost like, oh yeah, okay. It may be a little far-fetched, but the reasoning behind it is a
how could this be far-fetched? Wait a minute. No, it's awesome. It's awesome. I'm just picturing this thing flying around and the noise it's got to make when it buzzes, and oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, thanks for creeping us out. Yeah,
you're welcome. Good for the summer if you're not a mosquito person.
Well, we actually do have a good question here from Rami, who says, if there was a movie adaptation, would you like it to take place in the 50s?
You know what? The issue is how the mosquito became as big as it did. Okay. But it would work. It actually would work in a 50s setting if I changed what the cause was. Okay. But I wouldn't want to make it. I wouldn't want to do it like the atomic thing. I'd want it to be something people would not have guessed. Something very low key. And then people go, well, wow, I would have never thought that would have been the cause of why this thing became what it became.
Okay, so it's not Oppenheimer. All right.
No.
Speaking of movies, because we could have gone there. All right. Well, I think it's fascinating what you guys have done, and there's several of you that have worked on this series, Growing All the Time, and the way you put it together, the conceit is it's kind of like the Scheherazade 1001, tales and stuff. Can you just tell us briefly how that all works with these stories?
So the idea, this book includes stories by both Stephen Van Patten and Kirk Johnson. Stephen Van Patten and I came up with the original concept which was the first book, Hell at the Way Station. And it was really based on our love for anthology movies and how you always, like in an anthology movie, there's that one story and then the smaller stories add into the wraparound. So like the original Tales from the Crypt movie from the 70s, or the house that dripped blood, things of that nature. So what we did was we had this one story that would include us as the main characters. And these smaller stories were stories that we created within that universe. So for the first book, it was two writers, literally, it's two writers walk into a bar.
Yes.
And there's a demonic presence in the bar, but in order to find out what it is, we have to tell horror stories to the bartender to get the answers. This book, Hell at Brooklyn T, takes place several hours after the events of the first one, where now we're in a tea shop. And it's still relatively the same concept where instead in this particular turn of events, we are now confronted by actual ghosts who have information on something that is chasing us. And so this is how we continued with the stories for that series as well.
Cool. Well, I know you've been growing your crowd. It was you and Stephen Van Patten for the first one, and then you brought in Kirk Johnson for the second one, for the next one. And you guys have been doing the Beef, Wine, and Shenanigans podcast, and you also have Denise Tapscott in there with you as well.
Yes.
So we're going to be doing something fun kind of together. We can talk about this a little bit more at the end, but we have a special episode coming up. Speaking of fun things from the 70s, Galactic Terrors special presentation of Beef, Wine, and Shenanigans. We're teaming up to tell us.
So we are doing for the 57th anniversary of Dark Shadows. We will be interviewing Sharon Lintz, who played Sarah Collins on the show.
She was a little girl then, right?
She was a little girl. And she agreed to do this wonderful, intimate Q&A with us on Sunday night. So we're going to be, and she's extremely excited about doing this the last time I spoke to her. So we're going to be talking with her about everything about the show, what happened after the show ended, what she's been up to all these years. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And if you're a Dark Shadows fan, I mean, especially if you're a fan of the original series, you definitely don't want to miss this. This is an absolute wonderful opportunity to hear from somebody who was there.
You know, I'm a little bit older than you, but I used to rush home from school to see it every day. And I would miss like the first 5 minutes and my mom would have to fill me in. So, So there it is. Oh, there. Very cool. Very cool. And on the bottom right there, we've got the Beef, Wine, and Shenanigans folks who are up to a few shenanigans. It's Excellent.
Yes.
All right. We'll say a few words more about this when we get to the end about what's coming up. But I just wanted to get that in there because it follows right on what you've been doing. So thank you so much, Mark. This is really cool. I really enjoyed hearing the story and hearing you read it. So that was neat. I just dropped my brain. Hold on a second. Oh, I found a brain. I'm not sure if it's mine, but I'm going to go ahead with it anyway.
All right.
Yay. Our next reader tonight is Amy GRECH. Happy to introduce her. Amy has sold over 100 stories to various anthologies and magazines, including A New York State of Fright, Apex Magazine, Even in the Grave, Gorefest, Hell's Heart and Hell's Highways, Hell's Mall, Microverses, Punk Noir Magazine, Roy Fainéant Press, Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, Yellow Mama, and many others. Very prolific. Alien Buddha Press recently published her poetry chapbook, A Shadow of Your Former Self. She's an active member of the Horror Writers Association and the International Thriller Writers who lives in Forest Hill, Queens. You can connect with Amy on Twitter at Amy GRECH or visit her website at crimsonscreams.com. Amy?
everyone. I'll be reading from my story, Deadeye in Hush, Don't Wake the Monster. Standing with one eye shut in front of the shooting gallery at the county fair, Billy Hogan felt the crotch of his jeans tighten and raised his air rifle slowly. He didn't budge. All the while, his father's words echoed in the confines of his mind. You've got to get him when they least expect it, son. Ask yourself what Jesus would do, and your aim will be true. His father stood directly behind the boy with his brawny arms folded. Billy felt his hard stare driving him to succeed. He studied the yellow ducks passing by, watching them with deadpan eyes, and knocked them down without missing a beat. On one of their frequent trips into the woods behind the house, Billy's father, a big bearish man with a grizzly beard, usually bagged a deer or sometimes a bunch of squirrels with 4 bullets, one for each of his victims. He never wasted a shot, no matter what. Mr. Hogan taught his son how to focus on his target at all costs. He stressed the importance of waiting until the prey appeared in the center of a telescopic sight before taking the shot. Like a martyr on the cross was the phrase he used to make the concept easier for young Billy to grasp. In Sunday school, the boy learned that a martyr was someone who endured great suffering for a cause they believed in, just like Jesus did. Billy watched in awe as his father raised his Remington pump-action shotgun silently, swiftly. He froze, shut one eye, squinted with the other, took a deep breath, switched off the cross-bolt safety, and waited until his prey, a deer this time, entered the crosshairs in the telescopic sight before he exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the young buck fell dead. Sometimes he would let Billy hold the rifle on his own when the magazine was empty, the muzzle still smoking from a recent kill. The boy loved the feel of it, sleek and heavy. It was a man's gun, not a child's toy, cheap and light like the BB gun he had his eye on at the fair. His father stood behind him, guiding his movements, while Billy struggled to hold the gun level. The boy felt his father's breath, hot, whiskey sour in his ear. Don't worry, Billy, you'll grow into it in no time. Billy nodded. I can hardly wait. Be patient, son. You can't rush perfection. You've got to take it as it comes. He shook his head. Remember, practice makes perfect. The boy grinned. Got it, Dad. His father placed his calloused index finger on top of Billy's tender one, and together they caressed the trigger before squeezing off a shot. The old man behind the counter at the fair, excuse me, dressed in a red and white pinstripe shirt and black pants, was a guest as he watched the tall, lanky kid standing in front of him knock down all of the moving targets, including the mechanical mother goose that flapped her wings right between the eyes. Let's see. Okay. A crowd gathered round to witness this freakish occurrence, this being the first time anyone ever hit everything the first time around. Before he knew it, the man was shouting, "We have a winner." He unlocked the glass case that housed the coveted grand prize, a BB gun complete with a telescopic sight. Billy had had his eye on it since last year's fair, but had not been skilled enough to win it. But a lot had changed since he turned 10 last summer. His penis got hard when he least expected it, and he was frequently roused from exciting dreams about guns or girls by a warm dampness in his boxers. The man behind the counter bent down to whisper in his ear, "Be careful how you handle this gun, boy. It can be extremely dangerous if it's not used properly. Someone could easily get hurt." Billy nodded with the shit-eating grin plastered across his face. "Look what I won, Dad." He cradled the gun in his wiry arms and pointed it at a slight angle before bringing it over to his father. "You've earned it, Billy. That was some fancy shooting back there. I'm impressed. You've got talent, son. That's half the battle. Now you've got to whet your appetite for the hunt. His father patted him on the head. I aim to please. He tucked the BB gun under his arm. On their walk back through the woods, Billy's father nodded his approval. I see you finally learned how to shoot your load. Yeah, right, Dad. Billy blushed and kept his eyes on the ground, embarrassed by his choice of words. I'm talking about the prize you just won. He pointed to the BB gun. I think it's time we had to talk about the birds and the bees. His father winked. Billy rolled his eyes. No one calls it that anymore. Stop trying to disguise sex. They already know the basics. I'm a real fast learner. Mr. Hogan snickered. That's my boy. The boy climbed the cracked concrete stairs that led to the back door, dug out the house keys out of the front pocket of his jeans, being careful not to aggravate his raging hard-on, and unlocked the door. His father closed it gently behind him without saying a word, walked over to the fridge, pulled out a can of root beer and handed it to Billy. Then he grabbed some ice from the freezer, dropped it into a rocks glass, and topped it off with a generous serving of single malt whiskey, a clear sign that his little talk would be involved and probably boring. Billy decided to get comfortable, setting his new BB gun in his lap. But he felt self-conscious about his hard-on. He hoped his father wouldn't notice it from across the table. Billy opened his root beer and took a long sip. His father took a long swig of whiskey, set his glass down on the table, and pushed it aside, more intent on the task at hand. Let us pray for forgiveness and strength. He made the sign of the cross, closed his eyes, and bowed his head. The boy adeptly mimicked his movements. Together they recited their favorite prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Billy's father opened his eyes and cleared his throat. Good sex with a woman is even better than that adrenaline rush you're probably still feeling after your impressive performance at the fair. Billy smirked, guilty as charged. The thrill of the kill really gets me going. The older man grunted and continued his lecture. When you handle a gun or a woman, if you've enjoyed yourself, you'll shoot your load without thinking about it. Of course, the gun requires your undivided attention. You've got to hone in on your target at the exact moment it's in your sights, or you'll miss your chance at the kill. His father paused to down the rest of his whiskey and wipe his mouth with the back of his hand. When you're with a woman, you've got complete control. You've got your bullet in her chamber, pumping her full of lead, so to speak. Do you follow? Billy finished his soda. I think so. Handling a gun is more of a challenge because you've got limited control over what you're after. But when you're with a woman, the challenge isn't always there. The excitement is. And I'll stop there. If you want to find out what happens, get the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
Terrific. So yeah, please, anybody with questions, just go ahead and post those in the chat. And this story, I think you mentioned this was inspired by A Pupil by Stephen King, right? Because the anthology is a sort of a Stephen King homage or tribute.
Yes, it is a Stephen King tribute anthology, Jim. And interesting note, all of the contributors are female.
Oh, okay. So that is interesting. A little bit of a different take. So what I guess, what was your first introduction to Stephen King? What was the first thing you read?
Funny story. I was on a family trip with my parents and brother visiting an aunt in Kingston, New York, and I was about 12 at the time. And my aunt said, oh, honey, I know how much you love to read. Here, I think you'll like this author. She handed me Cujo and Pet Sematary. So I started with those.
Okay. And did those get you hooked?
They did, yes.
It's interesting. A lot of people started with some of his more popular books like Salem's Lot or something like that. But Cujo and Pet Sematary are very good reads.
They are, yes.
Yes. Yeah, I think Rami says it all. Best aunt ever.
Yes. Yeah, and my parents could have said, oh, no, that's not for her. But luckily they didn't.
Corey, have you continued reading King over the years?
Yes, I can't say I've read everything he's written because he's so prolific, but I've read most of his books. In fact, 2 shelves on my bookshelf are all King's novels, paperbacks and hardcovers.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So here's something I've been wondering about, because you have been writing horror stories for quite a while. You've been an HWA member for quite a while, and you've been publishing consistently for all that time, which is a remarkable accomplishment. How has the horror genre changed in that time? Have you seen it go from sort of specific themes or trends to something different over time? Do you have a sense, or does it still feel like, you know, a good old classic horror story is something that readers always want?
I think it has changed over the years, just like everything else. You know, society has changed, but at the root of any good story, I still think is horror. I've also published some horror science fiction hybrid stories. I have one entitled the EV-2000, where a blood donation machine learns human emotions. This was long before AI, by the way, and it learns human emotions through the recipient's blood and DNA. And I wrote that one because I'm afraid of needles, and I just kind of, you know, like went off and did a fun what if. So things have changed slightly, to answer your question, in about 25 years, but not too much that I could see.
Okay. And about the horror publishing field, I think markets come and go, of course. But do you see anything that, you know, used to be popular when you first started that's now no longer popular in terms of format, or you know, the length of works that people like to read?
Yeah, do you mean editors or readers?
I was thinking readers.
Oh, okay. I was thinking along the lines of editors, but I think
Okay.
I can answer your question about readers now. Now it just occurred to me. I think novellas have become more popular than they were when I first started writing in the mid-90s. There are a lot of authors, myself included. I have 3 novellas circulating with different publishers that haven't found a home yet. But there's a lot of authors, both men and women, who publish novellas, and not just crime novellas. 2 of my novellas are crime novellas. The other's a dystopian novella. But like, who's it? Cassandra Caw. She did Nothing But Blackened Teeth, and she has another one, The Salt Grows Heavy, a new one. Have a new one. I haven't read the second book, but I've heard it's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Novellas seem to have be experiencing kind of a golden age, at least in horror.
Yes.
So, okay. So when you write, do you have a regular sort of writing routine? Do you listen to music when you write? Do you have a ritual, or do you just kind of write where you can and when you can?
I write where and when I can, because my bread and butter is online marketing. Excuse me. So if during the week, if I have a client deadline during work hours, that kind of takes precedence. And so I'll focus on writing, whether it's editing a story or poems that I've written at night or on the weekend. And I do listen to music all the time when I'm writing. It helps get me in the zone. I know a lot of authors who need silence.
What kind of music do you listen to?
I actually, a lot of people are going to cringe, but I actually stream Z100. So it's like popular music.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not cringing, but I don't think I could write to a background of Z100.
That's fair. Mm-hmm.
We have a quick question from Nicholas Dyack about Alphabet City. Is that back in print?
It actually is not. I have actually expanded it and retitled it. And that's one of the novellas I just mentioned earlier that I'm shopping around with various crime publishers. So hopefully soon, Nicholas. At this point, it would probably be sometime next year or even 2025. But keep your eye on my Twitter feed for updates.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. So we'll have you come back on at the end to talk about what is coming up next for you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Our next reader tonight is Douglas GWILYM. Editor and Bram-Stoker-Award-nominated author, Douglas has been known to compose a weird fiction rock opera or two. His short story Year 6 is on Ellen Datlow's recommended reading list for Best Horror 14. He edited Triangulation for 4 years and now co-edits The Midnight Zone. The forthcoming edition, Novus Monstrum, is a collection of never-before-seen monsters featuring original stories by greats and new voices in strange, dark fiction. He reads classics of the proto-weird on YouTube and has been guest staff at Alpha Young Writers Workshop. His short fiction appears in Lamplight, Lucent Dreaming, Dark Horses, Shelter of Daylight, Tales from the Moonlit Path, Penumbric Speculative Fiction Magazine, and Tales to Terrify. And you can find Douglas on Facebook at facebook.com/Douglas GWILYM. Please welcome Douglas.
Hi, I'm Douglas GWILYM. So what I have here for you tonight is an excerpt from a story called Old Growth that I have coming out in January in the quarterly Shelter of Daylight. Max. She tore herself away and began to move, her limbs feeling mechanical beneath her, upward. Her shirt was soaked with sweat. She pressed a forearm to her brow to give herself horse blinders for everything but the path ahead. He was up there. She'd been closest to him probably when she'd been dangling for her life over the mouth of this rabbit hole. She hadn't been able to reach him then. She had to reach him now. Talk to him. They were like planets, she realized, that had been in alignment briefly once and had spent years going off in opposite arcs of the galaxy ever since. Now they were near one another again. The only thing she could feel that she could put a name to was something like love. She achieved a stumbling uphill run as she moved without looking past great presences. She couldn't give them the time they deserved. They watched her, and she felt them as she passed. The levels began to pass uncounted. On one, she felt the presence of a child, giggling and trying to get her attention. She wanted to stop, to play, but she pushed on. Time telescoped like it did when she worked, when she lost herself at the wheel to the motions of her hands. Sunlight on her cheeks made her notice that they were wet with tears. She couldn't understand why. She wondered if it had been dark before. She tried to get back to the staggering run, and then a voice said her name. It wasn't the tremendous baritone of a tree or a god. It was Max. He was there, sitting above her on a chest-high stump. As she stared at him, he cracked his fingers and laughed nervously, and then whistled. All the things that made her crazy, all the things that made him seem too young for his years. He had no business being a boy at his age. He needed a haircut and a black curl stuck out from his head like a feather from a cap in a fairy tale. She completed the distance to him, breathing heavily. She leaned on the stump and looked up past legs that dangled like a puppet's. He was smiling. The stump looked like it had just been cut. It bled sap, and when he moved his legs, she could see that it tried to hold them. "Did you read the link I sent you?" he asked. "What?" Her brain fled back to the real world and its questions. "It explains it all," he went on. "They're honest. It was all right there." She felt it was her role to play the voice of reason. She didn't know if she felt it. "Max, you're not making any more sense than your texts did," she said. The nervous laugh again. "You didn't read it, did you?" She shook her head. The sun lit up his curls, put red and blonde in the dark brown, made him look like a weird angel. Max, an angel? But he was beautiful. "Come down here, stupid," she said. She felt more tender toward him than she could ever remember. She'd wondered if she'd ever see him again seconds before. He said nothing, so she talked. "This place, it's impossible. It's not like anything." "You're right about that," he said, "but it's exactly what they said it would be. They can't lie." "Who can't lie?" He made an all-encompassing gesture with his hand. "The old growth." She didn't understand him. She'd have made fun of him once, but back in the real world. But here she was confused. He was beautiful. She didn't know whether to be afraid of him or for him. "It's the heart of the old forest," he said. "Here." He reached down a hand, burning and moist, and put it on her shoulder. I found them on the internet. I don't know if you'd call them plant life or earth life, but they belong here. They've always been here. They're not much good for thinking on their own, but here at the center," he corrected himself, "here at the heart, they work together. They reach out through their creatures, through the web, and I was sort of looking for them, wasn't I?" "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Max grinned. The jackass smile she knew better than her own. "Maybe," he said carefully, "but do you know what they are? They're like the spirit of the forest. Lex, have you ever seen a Miyazaki movie?" She looked at him blankly. He had to extend his arm a little to reach hers, but he did, and he squeezed it. "Can you come down here? Can we talk about this?" she said. "I can't." She didn't know what was coming, but her gut told her what it would mean. She could feel it like a throbbing heartbeat deep in the wood. Ancient wood. She could see it spelled out in letters of sap trickling down the side of the stump. He must have cut the stump. How could he have done that? She cried. He looked at her, considering she'd never shed a tear in his presence in their lives. "Dude," he said, "you know I love you?" She nodded, mute, reached for him, tried to pull him physically down off of the seat by his pant legs and the crooks of his knees, but he didn't budge, couldn't. Maybe. He put a steadying hand on her forehead like she was a child. The hand was hot to the touch. "It's time," he said. "You made it just in time." And he was right. Something was happening. There was a tearing sound and Max moaned. She gripped him harder, but the heat scared her, and she fell backward into more of the violet moss. His hair looked aflame. She was terrified. She got up on her knees and watched because she felt she should be there to witness. She had to be there for him. The sap seemed to bubble. It rose up from the severed base of the great old tree and moved. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, it launched itself into fresh curls of green, moving at time-lapsed speed, curling and forcing its way upward, flowering as it did. Blossoms erupted in unified waves of color, blooming and looming large and dying, only to bud and pulse to life again. Ochre and orange, and then greens deeper than velvet, indigo that felt oppressive with its wildness. It gathered itself. It burst upward. She looked then at Max. His head was back, and his arms were raised into the air. He seemed to swell to twice his normal size. There was a pause more pregnant than she'd ever known. And then his body came apart like leaves blown in the wind. A force of green, of the vines, woody now and mature, tore through him. He was pulled upward and outward like taffy, skin and skull strained and parted, and something else worked from beneath. They separated in flashes of white, red, and the color of soft clay. Alex screamed. She thought her heart would stop. She sobbed. The tearing sound continued, but it was joined by another sound, a musical sound, harmonizing. It transformed the other sound. There were words, a chorus of sweet, sweet, and something that sounded like homily. It accelerated, changed pitch, became a twittering like birds. Alex fell back on her elbows in the moss and watched, witnessed. Her sobbing grew low and became a gasping for breath. Her eyes widened. She was looking at Max. He was above her now, hovering impossibly in the air above 20, 100 feet. She could no longer tell. She glimpsed tatters of the stupid t-shirt he'd been wearing, but it was not what she was seeing. She saw him then, like she'd never seen him before. He was there. All of his seen parts and his unseen. The funny cleft in his chin, the way he chewed pencils in figure drawing class, the way he'd snuck glances at her, watching. But deeper, more real, she could see the respect he had for her, drawn in intricate lines. Love like a brother for a sister, a father for a daughter. His cigarette habit was there in a 4-yard plume of gray and purple, billowing out and into the sunlight. She could see whole scenes, things and times they'd shared together, the stolen night at Ohio Pile behind closed gates, the songs they'd sing that she'd never have sung with her real friends, even stupid movies they'd shared. But more. There were things she'd never known, places she hadn't gone with him, his world and love and life since college, what she'd only known through texts and lunches, and which she'd never quite listened closely enough to get. She almost lost herself in the looking. She felt the tug of green at her ankles and knew then that if she stayed, she could be a part. She could follow the maze of this person she had only partly known forever. She could lose herself and put herself into place next to him, into the green, be a part of this monument, this masterpiece, be a part of the old growth. It was terrible, and it was perfect. It was, she knew, what he'd been looking for, what all those loving iterations, photo after photo, sketch after sketch, pot after pot, she thought, were about. She looked up into his face then. It was a feat she was barely able to accomplish from her position standing in the moss, but she made him out there, Max, his eyes beautiful and brown as ever, but swollen to the size of boulders. They appraised her, waiting. She was stunned, staggered. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and she knew then that she loved him, had maybe always loved him. She pulled hard at the vines at her ankles and felt pain, skin ripping and giving. She panicked and tore with her fingernails. They met thorns and warm green. But she freed herself. The face above still smiled. She took her first breath in what felt like an hour, looked away, down at the moss. His camera was there, lying in a bed of purple. She gathered it up, turned hard on her heel, and began the descent home. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Wow. That's very intense.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Before we jump into questions, I apologize for mispronouncing your name, Douglas. You're very kind and patient not to have.
Those of us with names that start with G and have a lot of weird letters in them, we understand this, Jim. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why I misread it, but it's Gwilym, and I've now seared that into my memory.
It's an Occam's razor thing. The simplest solution is best in this case.
Yes.
That's funny. That's funny.
Just anything with a Y in it throws me off. So.
Understandably.
It's true. Well,
But
I don't know,
Carol
Mr.
and I always wind
Chambert,
up-
you know. Yeah.
Yes. Carol and I always wind up near one another because of the G's.
Yes, you know,
cute.
I am always the last one in the alphabet somewhere, but in one point I was in a Polish community and there were people with GZ in the community, so I was no longer the last one. Yeah, that's cool. I really love this because it comes down to like this moment, and it's all the history of these two people together is like so focused. So I think you did an excellent job with that. It's a very cool story.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It was one of those ones that affected me very deeply when I finished it. I still remember finishing it. And I was just like, ah!
You when you make yourself cry, yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to present what is one of the major punchlines of the story, one of the major like hits, and then say there. But that is not the whole story. And if you'd like to understand more, it will be, on Shelter of Daylight here in January.
Uh-huh. Cool.
Which is a quarterly, neat little magazine plugging away for many years.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we actually have a question along those lines, since you mentioned that writing the story affected you so deeply. This is from Michelle Renee Lane. What is the scariest story you've ever written?
My apocalypses and my terrible scenarios, always end on an odd note of happiness, or contentedness at least. Like terrible things happen, impossible things happen, and part of the fun is to render that stuff with some psychological fidelity, as people would actually react. You think to these things, and I love that. Like get them up the tree and throw rocks at them, right? But when I get down right to the end, my characters always find something in themselves that Woody Harrelson character in Zombieland, where all of his life was kind of unfulfilled, but suddenly it's a zombie landscape and it's perfect for him.
Yes, he's been waiting.
He's been waiting for this. My characters aren't quite on that level, but they usually find something they can work with and find a way to go on. And so it's hard for me to pinpoint what is the most horrific. I guess there's too much hope in my stuff.
So what you're really saying is that you can take a horror story and use that as a lens to look at our society and delve into our inner selves and reveal the true humanity. Seems like what you're saying.
Good. I like that.
Yeah. Excellent.
We'll take it. It's very good.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun.
So,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you make a point of doing readings regularly, sort of live stream readings, and the reading that you just did was fantastic. Do you have a background in theater or performance or anything like that helps you, or are you just really enthusiastic about readings?
I love it, and I'm a father, so I've clocked some hours reading aloud. But I also had this class in undergrad called oral interpretation of literature, it was called. And we had this professor who would take us outside to a hillside, and a leaf would fall, and he would stop what he was doing, stand there, and the leaf would come, and he would catch the leaf gently. And so he's an interesting dude. But he taught me that class, taught me to do things I didn't think I could do at the time. I didn't think I could get up in front of folks, and do that, even though I was in rock bands. That was a little different. You strap the bass to, you sing, you can do this. But getting up in front of people and talking took longer, and that was one of the major keys for me. He taught me how to do it by making me do it over and over again, until that something in some switch was flipped in my head, and I'm like in the student union, and I climb up on top of the tables and start reciting Jabberwocky at the top of my lungs. So
as one does, yeah.
The change was wrought.
Yes.
Never to be.
Well, I've told you this before. You did so many readings online during the pandemic, and it really helped a lot of us stay sane, because there was another person and they were talking to us and they were saying wonderful, wonderful words of literature and great stories. So thank you again for that. I'm going to tell you that every time I see you.
Thank you, Carol. I had so much fun doing it, and it kept me
sitting out in a cemetery reading stuff. Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
But,
well, I hit all those weird fiction before Lovecraft and Lovecraft
We
contemporaries.
know.
I hit all that
Yeah.
stuff super hard, and it was fun. I love that stuff. So
Well, I'll just throw out there, Jim had edited the Under Twin Suns anthology of stories
know.
based on Robert Chambers, and you have
Yeah.
read the original Robert Chambers one. So if
have.
people want to hear that, he did a great job with them. Go look on his site and find them. But I'm
Okay.
wondering
And
how that
check out.
affected. Yes, I'm wondering how that affected your writing to be reading all of these things and exploring them that way. Do you think it had an impact on how you shape your words or what you think about?
If I were to judge by what I just read you, I would say maybe so. But I wrote that
was thinking
before the
that.
pandemic.
Well, okay.
It just felt right. I'm just really comfortable with that stuff. I used to read like Victorian fairy tales for LibriVox, for free. And so you can still read that stuff out there. And used to read some Lovecraft for LibriVox. And I worked for a tiny press briefly, doing their audiobooks. I did like 4 audiobooks before I
Yes.
not got distracted. Some of the material wasn't quite. It was a small press. I had fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, well.
Well,
We just put the link in there for some of the proto-weird stuff you read.
Oh, awesome.
So people can
Yeah.
find it there.
Yeah, that link has them chronologically, not in the order I read them, but in the order they were written and
Okay.
released. So that you can,
That's
if you want a
interesting.
history lesson in the weird starting in the early 1800s, I'm kind of pleased with how that played out. So.
Fantastic. We have a comment from Nicholas Dyack, and I'm thinking for those of us who may not know what he's talking about, maybe you can fill us in, Douglas.
I
What
know.
does he say?
He says your album favorite monsters rules with a Z.
Thank you, Nicholas.
So that means it rules.
Yeah.
extra.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I got to play a little music at the conference at StokerCon this year, which was pretty great. I just had some impromptu shows. I kept my uke on my shoulder, mostly as like Linus's blanket as a comfort object, because I had so many things to do. I did four panels and an author reading and a poetry. Did Linda's poetry. I never miss Linda Addison's poetry reading. Don't miss it if you're ever at StokerCon. And also was up for a Bram-Stoker Award for my short story Poppy's Poppy this year, which was a wild ride.
Oh, it's a great story, and you are a finalist forever. Once you're nominated, you almost don't care if you win. Well, of course you do, but
You
you're a
do.
finalist forever.
Yeah.
That's
So
cool.
what
I just
is-
put
what is
a
favorite
link
monsters? Is this an album that?
Oh, it is. So it's a concept album I did a couple of years. I released it maybe a year before the pandemic, and it was a year before the pandemic because I knew that Nick liked this record because we've talked about it.
Okay.
And Nick and I met at Stoker 19, I believe, and that was the year that it was released. And it's a concept album. It's I just decided I would write a song based on monster tropes, but turn each of them on their ear as much as I possibly could. Just do something. Yes, why is Uncle Mograth so mean? So Uncle
It's one of the
Mograth
songs.
is one of my Lovecraftian, pseudo-Lovecraftian monsters. It's almost a satirical bit, and it's a conversation between a sort of more biblical god, and it's a very strange song. I think it's Nick's favorite on the record. Thank you, Nick.
All right. Is that record something people can find online?
Yeah.
Or-
Well, I
you
put
can
the
look
link
up-
to Bandcamp in the chat there, so people
Oh,
nice.
can get it there.
Carol
Yeah,
is
I didn't say that out loud.
3
You
steps
can
ahead
also
of us as
stream it
usual.
on
Thank you.
Spotify,
Awesome.
YouTube Music, any of the major streaming services have it. So
Bunch of places. Yeah,
Very cool.
Very cool. Yeah, that's fun. Can't wait to see your whole rock show at the next Stoker. Yeah.
we'll see. There are folks who are like, could we play something next year? It's like, yeah,
Get John
Maybe.
Palisano out there. Yeah,
that'd be awesome. So
that could be very cool. Well, there's some other things that have been keeping you busy.
yes, and keeping me up at night and the like. So I've edited 4 anthologies in the past. I edited Triangulation for 4 years, which is fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. And I had to have it pointed out to me that in my hands it became weird fantasy, weird sci-fi, and weird horror. So it's a little bit coming home for me to write or to put together an anthology with my good friend Ken McGregor, who edited Stitched Lips, which was up for a Shirley Jackson Award last year. Applause for Ken, and for all the wonderful folks in Stitched Lips. Anyway, he and I printed him in Triangulation, and we got to know each other, and we wound up texting far too much. And time passed, and we kept talking about editing something together. And last year, it just kind of came together. And he's the kind of guy who's like, you give him a little bit, and he runs with it. He's like, yeah, we're doing this. And so I just got pulled in his wake briefly, and then I caught up. And we're having a series of anthologies called The Midnight Zone, which is the level below the Twilight Zone for all you oceanographically inclined humans or otherwise. And so it's a little darker. It's a little sketchier down there. And the series, the first edition, released hopefully here by the end of August by Dragon's Roost Press, is called Novus Monstrum. And Novus Monstrum is a series of hopefully never before seen monsters, or at least, you know, we're setting the tropes aside, and we're having just as much fun as we can, and seeing if we can't cook up some fresh terrors and see how they resonate. And it has been fantastic. Triangulation was all slush. You know, we just loved getting folks to the semi-pro level. This, we did half and half. We invited some amazing people to be our featured authors, and we decided to do it about 50-50, and we got them in there. And when you get Joe Lansdale and Gemma Files and Ramsey Campbell and Jonathan Mayberry and Lucy A. Snyder and Jeffrey Thomas and all these wonderful people, I hate to miss anyone, Gabby Triana, Gabino Iglesias, just wonderful. Gwendolyn Keist. So this collection, when you say we have these people, anybody else interested in being in the book? A few people send you stuff. So
you must be overwhelmed. Yeah.
It was fantastic. I feel I tricked the universe into sending me monster stories from around the world. 800 of them.
Oh my gosh.
So it was lovely.
800 stories.
That's a lot. That is a lot to read through. Yeah.
Wow.
So very, very exciting.
Yeah. So your Kickstarter is still going on now, right?
It is.
Yes.
So we're treating it as a pre-sale, and then it's a chance to get some really cool perks. Thank you. Very good. We have the link there. And, you know, we surpassed our goal, I think, after 11 days, 12 days, which is really awesome. People have been very, very cool and very interested in this. It's very exciting. And I have a little announcement, as I promised.
Yes, something exciting, huh?
So when you have, you know, an incredible lineup of folks who have agreed to be in this thing with you, you know, we're upstarts. We're starting a new thing. And they said yes. So many of the people we asked to say, asked to do it said yes. We were just stunned. And then the quality of the stuff that came in, like I said, from around the world is just amazing. And we've got 13 stories from the open call that I think they're gonna blow your minds, and you're gonna want to find these folks, and you're gonna want to read anything they put out. We're just in love with them, and we're in love with the content. And so we needed the perfect introduction for this. And we racked our brains, and we tried all these different angles, and we asked some people, and, you know, we had some conversations. And then we hit on what felt to us like a really excellent solution. And this wonderful human being has written us an introduction that we love, and we're excited for you to read. I'm just going to read a bio here. Jamie Flanagan is an American writer and actor. Screenwriting credits include The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, The Midnight Club, and upcoming releases The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix, Creepshow's Season 4, AMC Shudder, and Peacock's Hysteria. Jamie absolutely knocked our socks off with this introduction. And we just feel like the missing piece is in place.
They must have really loved your words in there.
We had a great experience. I'd be a fool not to mention that Trevor Henderson painted our cover, and we're just in love with this thing. It gives me all the feels of being 10 years old, and having my best friend hand me the latest edition of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing because he's finished with it. Like, he handed them all to me as they came out.
Wow.
That feeling that I got, that kid is here inside me. And when I look at that cover, I'm just like, yeah.
I would suggest everybody here with us tonight, if go to the Kickstarter, if only to see the cover. It really is spectacular, and while you're there, back the project, of course. But
as one does,
yeah. But it is a visual feast, that cover.
Trevor Henderson is a brilliant visual artist. You may have seen his films, short horror films, the Siren Head series, which were crazy viral. Especially if you're 15 to 25, you know about this. Amazing stuff. And he's got a middle grade book that he wrote and illustrated coming out on Scholastic here in a month.
Oh, that's
and he's
great.
just a tremendously good human. Everybody we've worked with has just been so great. Again, it just speaks to the community and to what it means to be someone who pursues the darkness with their words. I mean, how great are these people?
Yeah.
All right, well, why don't we have Mark?
Speaking of great people,
Yes.
and Amy come back on for a little bit, and we can find out what everyone has.
Yeah, see what they're up to as well.
Horizon. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Amy and Mark, thanks for coming back in.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Cool. So, what do you guys have coming up, Amy? What's on the horizon for you?
I actually am waiting for blurbs for my poetry chapbook, A Shadow of Your Former Self, coming out from Alien Buddha Press. So it's a little delayed, but I have some amazing blurbs coming. So it should be worth the wait. I'm pretty excited. I've written a few poems over the years, and a few months ago I took a look and I saw that Alien Buddha had an open call. And they liked my stuff, so that's pretty exciting.
Okay, that's neat.
Thank you.
Cool. I think it's fun that you do, poetry as well as prose. So.
Yeah, my muse does not discriminate. Sometimes I'm just along for the ride. I think we can all relate to that, right?
That's fun.
Yes.
So,
I wish it happened more often, Amy.
Right.
But I get it.
Cool.
Yeah.
We got a little teaser for you, Amy, from Chris Ryan, who's with us tonight. When we were doing your Q&A, he said something is coming out in Soul Scream Anthology.
That's right. I do have a story coming out in the second edition of Soul Scream.
Cool.
It's a fun story. It's a sci-fi horror hybrid. So I don't want to divulge too much, but it will not disappoint.
Good.
And Linda Addison says, "Yay for poetry, Amy." Yeah.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Linda. I love you.
Woo-hoo. Yeah. Cool. How about you, Mark? What are you up to these days?
So now that I finally have, for the first time in my life, a summer off, I started teaching this year. I started teaching high school English and creative writing. So now that I have a summer off, I'm catching up on a bunch of short stories that I have been commissioned to write for several anthologies, and preparing for Sunday's show with Sharon Lentz.
Yeah.
And also,
Yoink.
we are
There it is.
there it is.
Nice.
We are working on a third installment to the Hell series. This next book will be all four of us. So Denise Tapscott will be making her debut with us. She's already written her work is already out there. And so we just thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to include her in what might be the final story in the series. This might be the end. We don't know yet, but we'll be working on that and hopefully have that ready sometime for next year.
Can you tell us yet where Hell is going this time?
I can't yet.
Okay.
All right.
I can't, but some very intense things are going to go down in this last book. So we have literally did one of those sessions where we wrote everything in the kitchen sink into what we want the book to look like, and now it's just a matter of just fleshing it all out, and then just going through the process of killing whatever darlings need to be killed in order for the book to be a plausible length and for people to enjoy it. But
so you're not calling it Hell in a Handcart? No, okay.
No.
we do have a
Nicholas has it.
Boba tea. Okay. All right.
That could be cool.
You never know.
We'll see. And I also have. Oh, I see. Michelle said the Supreme Court. Maybe we may have to take a detour and handle.
Yeah, take care of things. Yeah.
And I guess my final was that I just had. Oh my God, how am I forgetting the name of this book? Black and Roots. Just came out. Excellent collection. I'm in there with some very, very great writers.
Oh, there we go.
There it is. And what is very unique about this particular anthology, they are zombie stories, but not the typical zombie. Everybody wrote something completely different using the zombie mythos and got away from the flesh eaters. And you should check this out. It's got a lot of great stories in it.
Cool. Black and Roots. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's exciting. Linda's got her copy. Yeah.
Yes.
Jim, what about you? What's coming up for you?
I have a new collection of cosmic horror fiction coming out from Weird House Press in the near future. It's called A Bright and Beautiful Eternal World. And I just got a fantastic blurb for it from the amazing and generous Jonathan Mayberry. I'll be sharing that on social media in full soon, but the short quote is literary magic. So I'm really pleased with that. But I'm very excited to get that book out. It's set in my Nixport cycle of stories, which are all cosmic horror stories located around a fictional town on Long Island. And this kind of, I won't say completes the cycle, but it certainly fills in a lot of the gaps.
Okay. And they do make gorgeous books. They do. Yeah. I'm really happy to be working with Weird House. And it will be fully illustrated. I think every story in the book will have an illustration. Yeah. I don't remember if all of them are color, and I haven't seen them yet, so I don't know, but I think most of them will. Yeah. Well, Nick agrees. Yeah. Weird House Press does some Gordon. Yeah. And Carol, what do you have? I have two fun, exciting things. As you've heard me say a lot of times, I have a story in Weird House, in Weird Tales 367, the Cosmic Horror. But the really exciting thing is that they have just come out with the audiobook of it, which is so awesome. And they got the narrator that I had asked for, who did my friend Andrea Stewart's book. Cool. And oh my gosh, it's just fabulous. And I also have a short story in a collection of Poe-inspired stories called Nevermore, coming out from Falstaff Books, which is just funded their Kickstarter. So that'll be coming out in the fall. So that's exciting. So yay. So man, everybody's been so busy. You'd think we were like drinking lots of coffee or tea or something, you know? Too much coffee. Actually, I'm sorry. Take that back. I don't. Too much, but coffee, I don't understand no.
Never enough.
Yeah. Well, you guys are so much fun to hang out with, you know. I just think we should do this every night. I'll just sit around, you guys can read to me, and you know. If people can't make it in person, go find Douglas's recordings and listen to him. That's what we should do. Definitely. And that is Douglas GWILYM. I'm getting it right now.
Thanks, Jim.
But definitely check out the Kickstarter for Novus Monstrum. Check out the Kickstarter for Afflicted, which is ending, I think, tomorrow. Yes, it's ending tomorrow. Everybody, please support it because I need to hear this second season. I absolutely need to hear it.
It's just so wonderful from Tanya Ransom. And also Escalators to Hell, Shopping Mall Horrors. And we've put all the links to these things up earlier in the chat, so you can find all those as well. And then we have a couple of things coming up from Horror Writers New York. We are doing our last Summer Dark reading is coming up on Friday, July 28th. Yeah. And that's a really fun reading in Hell's Kitchen. You sit outside in a garden in the middle of Manhattan reading horror stories to folks. And, you know, people walk by and sit down there like, what are you doing? Oh, yeah. It's very, very cool. So that's exciting.
Yeah, this
So
is, I
great.
think, our 5th year of the Summer Dark reading series. And we had a rough start this year, getting rained out, I think, for our first 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, rain or chance of thunder or, you know,
Kept going, yes. But
Yeah.
we've rebounded.
Yes, it's been good, smooth sailing since. And then there's another live in-person event coming up Tuesday, July 18th, right, Carol? This is at Barrow's Intense Tasting Room in Industry City. This is the Brooklyn Books and Booze reading series, which is curated by Randy Dawn, one of our HWA NY members. And this month they're featuring Sarah Pinsker, Michael Swanwick, Bryant Trent, and Jeffrey Ford. So that is going to be one heck of a night of good fiction.
Yes, it's pretty awesome. And I think it'll be a little bit crowded, but they have just finished up their redo of the bar. So there should be some room there. So you can get a ticket in advance, and the ticket gets you a beverage at the bar, and they have fun stuff there and friendly folks. So very cool. Yeah. I put the link in there. So great. Well, thanks, everybody. This was an awful lot of fun.
Thank you for having us. It was great.
Yeah. I look forward to doing it again.
We hope to see you next month, August 10th, for the August Galactic Terrors. In the meantime, feel free to join our newsletter if you haven't yet. And, of course, like and subscribe.
For those on YouTube, yes.
I watched YouTube videos where they work the like and subscribe thing so beautifully. And I'm like, I like and subscribe, thumbs up. There we go.
Yeah, it's easy. Yeah. Terrific. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Douglas, Amy, and Mark, for sharing your stories with us, and good luck with your projects.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and all the readers can hang on for a second. We'll talk to you guys after.
We'll see everybody Sunday.
Yes, come back.
Yeah.
Don't forget.
Come back Sunday.
July 16th,
Yes.
9:30 p.m. All right.
Yes. Sounds
With
good.
Sharon Smith Lens.
There it is.
Wait, Mark, this says 9 p.m.
It's we're starting an hour, half hour early.
9 p.m. All right.
Yes,
Good. Let's make sure we
9
got that.
p.m.
All right. See you then, or see you next month, or both. Take care, everyone.